And a short time ago, I was joined by Senior Gillard Government Minister Craig Emerson. Craig Emerson, welcome.
Thank you.
Should Peter Slipper be reinstated as Speaker?
He certainly suffered an injustice in terms of the treatment that has been meted out to him, and that is that the Liberal National parties under Mr Abbott's leadership have abused court processes to seek to achieve two objectives. One, to damage Mr Slipper and advantage the LNP aspirant for his seat, Mr Mal Brough, and two, to change the Government of Australia. This is a scandal of enormous proportions that Tony Abbott's Liberals would abuse legal processes, court processes, to seek to change the Government of Australia.
We'll get on to that in a moment, but given that Mr Slipper has been utterly vindicated, should he not be reinstated as Speaker?
These are matters for the Parliament. It is the Parliament that puts speakers in place. Mr Slipper was put in a position where he needed not only to step down but to resign from the speakership. It was over some text message exchanges that emerged as a result of this court case. But what is, and while no one on the Labor side supports or condones the content of those messages, the fact is they were as a result of private conversations or correspondence, and the fact is that they emerged as a result of processes that the judge described as an abuse.
Yeah, certainly they would never have been in the public domain if it had not been for this court case. And Justice Rare has found that Mal Brough and James Ashby conspired to use the court to damage Peter Slipper and the government to advance the political interests of Mal Brough and the Liberal National Party. Could the Commonwealth hold an inquiry into that?
Well, it could, and I can't give you a definitive answer on this, Chris, but it is a very serious matter. It's very hard to recall an instance where a judge in a court has commented, as a result of all the information in front of him, that Mr Ashby and the LNP sought to disadvantage, hurt, harm Mr Slipper, which they did very effectively, I might say, to the advantage of the LNP that wanted that seat back and to seek to change the balance in the House of Representatives, the Government of Australia. Now, I remember when Anthony Albanese likened this to Watergate as some sort of conspiracy, and he was slammed by Shadow Attorney General George Brandis. He was slammed by Mr Abbott, but of course it appears that that's what was going on, that this was a concocted process that brought in issues such as cab charges that were then dropped, all of which were calculated to damage Mr Slipper to the advantage of the Liberal National parties of Australia. Where's Mr Abbott? Gone to ground. I'm sure when he does emerge in London, he will be unavailable for comment. He has a lot of questions to answer, Chris. The full involvement of the LNP, no more economical language such as he had no specific knowledge. The LNP obviously had knowledge of this beforehand.
Well, in fact, if you look at what this 76-page judgment said, Mr Abbott's not mentioned in it, Senator Brandis has not mentioned in it, Mr Pyne has not mentioned it, some other LNP figures are mentioned in it, and don't forget also that the judge had access to James Ashby's text messages, his phone and his email, which means that if there was a trail that led back to Mr Abbott, it would have been found.
Well, why did Mr Hockey have a spokesman say that he had a one-on-one meeting over the Easter, which is a highly relevant period in this, with Mr Palmer, and Mr Palmer had to say, no, that's not right. That's not right. Mal Brough was at that meeting. Why did Mr Hockey seek to hide the fact that Mal Brough was at that meeting at the then Hyatt Coolum Resort? Again, you've got a senior coalition frontbencher, Shadow Treasurer, who said later, yes, they did discuss Slipper. Now, you don't have to go far for Mr Hockey then to convey whatever information he had to Mr Abbott or his office. That doesn't have to only be by way of text message. Now, obviously, the LNP knew about
on the way that this court case was conducted, the judge accused James Ashby's lawyer, Michael Harmer, of abusive privilege, abusive process, said that no lawyer acting responsibly could have included some of the matters he argued, calling them scandalous, oppressive and an abuse of Mr Harmer's professional obligations to the court as a lawyer. Will you be referring him to the New South Wales Legal Services Commissioner?
Well, again, these are not decisions for me, but it was an damning indictment on the legal advisers to Mr Ashby. And it does say it all, doesn't it, that Mr Ashby then hired Mr. Anthony McClellan, who is a PR agent in what's supposed to be legal proceedings at $550 an hour plus GST. I think that, as much as anything, highlights what this was all about. It was a political assassination of the Speaker of Australia to advantage the Abbott Liberals and to change the composition of the House of Representatives in a hung parliament.
Did the Commonwealth leave Mr. Slipper hanging out to dry? Because you were also a respondent in this case. You filed a similar abuse of process claim in the federal court, and then you pulled out and paid James Ashby $50,000. And the effect of that was, at least in the mind of some people, that James Ashby had a case.
Well, the Commonwealth was a defendant in the case. Remember that Mr. Ashby and his lawyers were taking action not only against Mr. Slipper but against the Commonwealth of Australia.
But you filed abuse of process. Mr. Slipper saw it through and you didn't.
Yeah, well, of course, if you get advice, as the Attorney-General did, that the appropriate course of action was to settle the matter so that it did not prolong.
She doesn't have to accept that advice, right. and you only pulled out 2 months ago.
I think it's pretty important. It's pretty important to deal with legal advice that you get. But, Chris, let's get this clear. The centrepiece of this scandal is not whether the Commonwealth stayed in it or not. It is the motive, the intent and the abuse that was perpetrated by Tony Abbott's Liberals. He will now go to ground as he did last time. He had a press release ready at 9:15 a.m. when the story broke. Why? Because they knew it was going to break. Why did they have 2 people lined up for the Sunday programs? Because they knew it was going to break. And then Mr. Abbott looked down the barrel of a camera and said he had no specific knowledge. Of course he did. Of course he knew what was going on. They were told what was going on. Warren Inch told them what was going on at least the night before. And you've got Joe Hockey, the Shadow Treasurer, in discussions with Mr. Brough about these sorts of matters.
Craig Emerson, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.